We begin this session with a prayer. Om Namah Shri Yatirajaya Vivekananda Suraye Satchit Sukha Swarupaya Swami Sarvasthananda. In our previous class, we were discussing about the 8 steps of yoga, and we'll just have a cursory glance as to what are those 8 steps. The first, as I told you, they form the moral virtues which are absolutely essential before we start practicing meditation. Meditation, in fact, is the 7th step. Dhyana, or meditation as it is popularly known, forms the 7th step in the among the 8 steps of yoga. So the first 2 steps are the preliminary requisites, the preliminary moral virtues which form part of almost every religion, as we discussed last time. It is known as yama and niyama. Yama is external control of the external organs and control of our external behavior, our interaction with the universe, how we regulate it so that there is harmony. And niyama are the internal virtues, the virtues which are at the level of the mind. They are not gross actions, but they are capable of causing different types of behavior in a person. So the 8 steps begin with the first 2 steps, which are the moral virtues. The third is asana. Asana has become very popular. Whenever we talk of yoga, we understand that most of the people think that it is yogasanas. Yogasanas have become very popular along with pranayama. But very often people forget that the yama and niyama are equally important, because without that, without the first 2 steps, it's not possible, or it will not be beneficial for an aspirant to undergo asana and pranayama. Asana, of course, helps you to steady your body. So Swami Vivekananda is very clear. He says, without giving much importance to this asana, any posture which enables you to keep your spine erect, your head, neck and chest, all should be in one line. If that is achieved, then any asana is fine. The other asanas are just for keeping the body fit. They have nothing to do, as far as the higher aspects of yoga are concerned, the asanas become very secondary. But if somebody desires good health, the asanas are definitely important. So the first 3 steps are yama. Yama, as I told you, there are 5 yamas, the 5 external observances. Ahimsa, which is non-killing or non-injury. Satya, or truth, which is a virtue which is part of every religion in the world. Every religion in the world encourages us to speak the truth. Then we have asteya, non-stealing, not taking anything which does not belong to us. Then we have brahmacharya, or continence, which is another virtue which every religion, the higher aspects of religion, when we are practicing those higher aspects, these virtues are very important. So brahmacharya or continence is one of the 5 virtues, 5 yamas. Aparigraha is non-receiving of gifts. Non-receiving of gifts, so that we are not obliged to anybody. That obligation, we become free from all obligations if we strictly observe this principle of non-acceptance of gifts. So those who practice yoga, they have to observe these preliminary virtues, without which the asanas and pranayama and the higher forms of yoga, they lose all relevance. Because without the firm foundation of yama and niyama, Patanjali warns us that the practice of pranayama and asanas, pranayama and the higher forms of yoga may not lead you to the goal, to the desired goal. So you have to see that the foundation of yoga is very strong, and that constitutes the 5 yamas and 5 niyamas. Niyama are the internal attitudes which one aspirant or a yoga practitioner has to follow. One is shaucha, cleanliness, external cleanliness as well as internal cleanliness. It's not just keeping your body and keeping the surroundings clean. That is part of the shaucha, but shaucha means internal cleanliness as well. We have to cleanse our mind, cleanse our thoughts, cleanse our habits and all those things. They are more of a mental nature rather than external observances of cleanliness. Santosha is contentment, to be content with whatever we get in life and not to be unnecessarily worried about the future or worry about the past, and not to be anxious and worrisome in nature. That is what contentment does. So santosha or contentment is another virtue. Then we have, as I told you, tapas or austerity. Austerity here means leaving your comfort zone, trying to do things which are good for you, not necessarily pleasurable. In Kathopanishad, as I told you, there were Yama is instructing his disciple Nachiketa that two things always approach a person. One is a thing which is really good for you, Shreya. Another is Preya, that which is pleasant. So the pleasant always need not be good. Sometimes the pleasant can be good, but very often good is far from pleasant. Whatever is really good for you may not be very pleasant, a pleasurable thing. So austerity means to be able to undertake the path of goodness without seeking pleasure. So that kind of some kind of control of the organs and the control of our behavior which lead you to real good, that is known as austerity, tapas. Swadhyaya is self-study, study about one's own self. That is known as swadhyaya. Adhyaya means study, swadhyaya means self-study. And then finally, surrender to God. So these are the 5 niyamas. There were 5 yamas: ahimsa, satya, asteya, brahmacharya, aparigraha. And that is non-killing, truth, non-stealing, continence, and non-receiving of gifts. That is yama. Those are the 5 actions or the 5 virtues, moral virtues which one has to practice. Niyama is shaucha, cleanliness; santosha, contentment; tapas, austerity; swadhyaya, study of one's own self; introspection, self-analysis, and all those things we discussed in great detail in our previous class. And Ishwar Parinidhana, which is self-surrender to God, trying to get rid of our silly ego which causes all the problems. And all the problems in our world is because of our lack of humility or the tendency of the ego to prop up now and then. So this control of this ego is possible only if we believe in if we surrender ourselves, surrender our ego to God, and do all actions as considering them as the will of God. So since here yoga does not insist on belief in a personal God. It believes in Prakriti, it believes in Purusha, two realities: nature, which is known as Prakriti, and that which is the substratum of the nature, pure consciousness, which is known as Purusha. So Prakriti is what we see around us, the whole nature. In Tantras, it is known as Shakti. So the same energy or the same power which is manifesting this universe, which is responsible for creation, maintenance of the universe, and destruction also. So all these functions are part of Prakriti. They don't affect the Purusha. This is a fundamental thing which yoga tells us, that our goal is to take the help of nature, to live a life in harmony with nature, so that through the help of nature, Prakriti itself will guide us to go beyond nature and try to see the consciousness which is eternal, eternal, the nature of that consciousness is Sat, Chit and Ananda, existence, consciousness and bliss. We spoke about this in great detail, how David Bentley Hart, in his wonderful book on the experience of God, in which he mentions that the three fundamental urges or desires of man, if they are universalized, they result in universal existence, universal consciousness, and universal bliss. These are the three basic urges which every human being or every created being has. Everybody wants to exist, nobody wants to die. That is Sat. Chit is consciousness. Everybody is conscious, wants to know more and more. They want to become omniscient. And then the final uh, urge, which a basic urge of human beings, is the desire for bliss or joy, the desire for unending joy, unalloyed bliss. So this unalloyed bliss can be attained only when one becomes one with the supreme consciousness, which is Purusha, which is of the nature of eternal joy. And in all other religions also, the idea of godhood or the idea of God, the very idea of God implies these three things: infinite existence, infinite knowledge or infinite consciousness, and infinite joy. So that is the goal of yoga also, to realize one's identity with the supreme self or Purusha as it is known. So it is, we have Purusha on one hand, the substratum of our whole existence, and the play of Prakriti, nature in which we live and have our being. We conduct ourselves in this world, we interact with the Prakriti, and Prakriti herself, I mean, Prakriti is always referred to as a feminine power. In Tantras, it is known as Shakti, which results in this created universe, the whole creation, and then finally dissolution, and then recreation. It goes on in a cycle. According to the Hindu, according to Vedanta, the whole process of creation is a cyclic process. There may be different multiverses, as they call. There is a universe, but there are multiverses. There are different universes in which in some place the creation is going on, in some place you are merging into the black hole, things are vanishing as it were, and in some places the star is born, and then there is the whole creation process of creation, the Big Bang and all those things begin. So Swami Vivekananda said, if you see the entire universe as such, there are different multiverses in which at different in these different multiverses or universe, you can't say the whole universe behaves in a particular way. There are smaller universes within this universe, smaller multiverses or smaller uh, uh, universes within this infinite universe, where creation is going on in some place dissolution is going on. So it's in Sankhya philosophy believes in the cyclic nature of the universe. So you cannot say the creation will go on eternally. The creation has to complete its cycle and get dissolved and go back into potential form. So Swami Vivekananda here, before he discussed pranayama, he goes on to discuss the very concept of prana, because we come to the third step after asana. The discussion is on pranayama. After yama, niyama, the third step is asana. And as I told you, asana is just sitting in a posture where your spine is erect. The spine, because all the nervous forces have a tendency to pass through the spinal cord, and that is where our body is connected to our mind, through the spine, through our nervous system, both the autonomous nervous system and the sympathetic nervous system. So both of them, both the nerve currents which are passing through the spinal column or the spinal cord, that has to be regulated in yoga. So for that, they insist that we should do asana is only for regulating this nervous current. If the body is bent, if the spine is not erect, then there is some problem in the flow of prana, pranic energy, the nervous energy. One of the in yoga or in Vedanta, the pranas have been divided into 5. One of the prana is breath. The other prana is vyana, which is the nervous energy, the flow of nervous energy throughout the body, which extends even beyond the body. There is a cosmic prana also. Prana is not just at the individual level, but it exists at the cosmic level also. So it's the universal energy. So Swami Vivekananda says, before we understand what pranayama is, before going into the practical aspects of pranayama, the theoretical background has to be made very, very clear. So he takes the help of science, and he believes that just as science says there is one thing known as matter, and there's another thing known as force or energy. So the universal energy is known as prana, and the energy with which the body functions, the individual prana, is part of this universal prana. So with respect to the cosmos, the macrocosm, the microcosmic prana has to be studied, because they are interlinked, they are connected. No individual is an island. He is connected in some way or the other. Even physically, we are part of the whole universe. Swami Vivekananda very often used to say that every atom in this universe drags the whole universe with it. You can't have anything independent. Everything is dependent on each other. So physically we are one. There is a unified, you can find some kind of unity in the material universe also. You can find unity in the mental universe also. You can find unity in this prana also. So this generalization, Swami Vivekananda said, the individual prana, if it is extended indefinitely, it becomes cosmic. It is connected in some way or the other to the cosmic prana. So when one meditates, the idea behind yoga is you first catch hold of that prana which is contained within your body, and try to study its association with the nature, the prana which animates nature. And then once you have found that connection, once you have controlled your prana, then it becomes easier to control the effect the external prana has on you. So you gain control, you gain some kind of self-control. So to even meditate properly, to gain some kind of self-control, because the mind, manomaya kosha, is just one layer. It's a subtle kind of existence which is more subtler than the prana. So along with the asana, we do pranayama for 2 reasons. First, it can regulate the functions of our body on one side, the lower side, the grosser side. And on the subtler side, it can control the functions of our mind, our thoughts. So Swami Vivekananda gives a lot of importance in his Raj Yoga, and in fact has dedicated 3 full chapters, discussing what is the psychic prana, what is the universal prana, and what is the connection between the two. The prana which animates the body, is it independent? Are we free? Are we in total control of our energy body, which is animating the Annamaya Sharira, the Annamaya Kosha? As I told you, there are 5 levels of existence: the Annamaya Kosha, Pranamaya Kosha, Manomaya Kosha, the mental sheath. Then we go to the Vijnanamaya Kosha, the discriminatory sheath, and then we have the Anandamaya Kosha. So our Vedanta, Vedanta as well as yoga, the Sankhya philosophy, has divided existence into these 5 different levels, depending on the order of the subtlety. One is more subtle than the other. The grossest is the body, Annamaya Kosha. The Pranamaya Kosha is subtle, so it controls the Annamaya Kosha, but definitely it has an effect on the Manomaya Kosha, which is, though it is more subtle, it varies to a large extent on the variation in the prana which we have in the body. So prana not only causes variations in our body functions, but it also causes a lot of variation in our thoughts. That's why when some people say that we are not in control of our thoughts, what they actually mean is they're not in control of their energy body, the prana which is animating their body. So that is why yoga goes step by step. First, it practices yama and niyama, tries to control the gross body, make the body steady, so that we can focus on the mind. Even to focus, to make the mind steady, people don't realize that the whole human behavior is psychosomatic. I mean, all the diseases also, they say to a certain extent, they are psychosomatic. The thoughts affect the body, they affect the prana and the mind, and the body, and the body and the prana also affects the thoughts. So each one is interacting upon the other. And because the mind is subtler than the prana, it has a greater degree of control over the prana and a much more greater degree of control over the body also. But we have forgotten that technique. So to revive the technique is the goal of yoga. So they first say that first three steps, yama, niyama and asana, help you to regulate your bodily functions with the help of prana. Then you do pranayama, you regulate the prana. And with a regulated prana and body, you can hope to regulate the thoughts, regulate your mental, the thoughts which you think. And once you can control your thoughts, then you can go and reach a state where you do pratyahara, dharana, dhyana. Dhyana is the technique of meditation. People want to jump to the seventh step. In fact, meditation is the seventh step in the series of steps which are necessary to develop develop the yogic personality. Yoga begins with the two yama and niyamas. After a long practice of yama and niyama, and intermittent, of course, you can make efforts to meditate also at the same time, but it becomes easier if you can regulate your prana. That's why pranayama has been given so much importance. And Swami Vivekananda says that without controlling the prana, it may be very difficult to control your mind. So he dedicates a lot of he discusses a lot about this prana in these three chapters. Now, what are the functions of prana? I will come to that. Swami Vivekananda tells us a beautiful story. You know, it's very easy to understand the effect of prana on the body, on the mind, through a beautiful story. So let us see what story he is telling us. Once upon a time, there was a king, and he had a minister. For some reason, he got terribly angry with the minister and locked him up on a tower, in a room on the top of a tower, and locked the whole thing so that he could not come down. And he wanted him to, that was a punishment which the minister was given by the king for some reason. And he was locked up in that, and there was no way he could come down because the door was locked. They took him to the top of the tower and locked him. The only way he could come down is jump with, that would have meant sure death. So but he was a very wise minister. So he, one day at night, he asks his wife to bring 4 or 5 things, so that he can come down. Now, what does he ask his wife? He asks her to bring a small beetle, a little drop of honey. Then he asks his wife to bring a very thin thread, pack thread, a silken thread. Then he asks her to bring a long pack thread, and then a stout twine, and then finally a big rope. So the wife obeys him and brings all these items, and then he tells her, you take that beetle and allow it to crawl on the wall and put a drop of honey on its near its mouth, near its mouth, so that it will go in search of honey and climb the tower. So the beetle doesn't realize that the honey which it's running after is stuck at the tip of the hair. So it just starts moving towards that honey, and in the process it climbs the wall. That was the idea. And then a small silken thread is tied to the leg of the beetle. And the silken thread being so light, it was very easy for the beetle to carry it up to the top. Once the beetle reaches the top, tempted by this honey, the king catches this silken thread, and then asks the wife, because the silken thread was very long, and since it was light, the beetle could pull it up to the top. And then he tells, once he gets hold of that silken thread, he asks his wife to tie the pack thread to that silken thread. And then he slowly pulls that pack thread up. And then he finally asks his wife to tie the stout twine to that, the slightly stouter thread. And then he pulls that slowly. And then finally he says, at the end of this stout twine, you tie this big rope so that the rope will not break. If we had asked the wife to tie the rope to the silken thread, it would have broken. The rope was very heavy. So finally, she manages to tie that rope, and finally he pulls the rope, and then finally ties the rope to the window, and then climbs down the rope and escapes. So the moral of the story, according to Swamiji, he says this breath, in pranayama, very often we believe that pranayama is this action of breath. Prana means normally people confuse it with breath. Swamiji says breath is just part of the entire exercise of pranayama. What pranayama means? Prana ayama means control of the prana. How do we control prana? We are controlling the internal energy as well as the energy which runs this universe. The universal energy is creating a constant influence on us, and our battle is how to struggle and fight with that, the forces trying to press us down. Once Swami Vivekananda was asked to give a definition of life. What is life? He gives a beautiful explanation of what life is. He says life is a struggle of a being trying to manifest himself under circumstances which are trying to press him down. The universal energy is always trying to press you down, and human progress constitutes in fighting against this, or trying to conquer the nature, conquer internal nature, and by conquering internal nature you get some sort of victory over the external nature. So this internal prana, once you get hold of the internal prana, you can control the external forces and prevent the external forces from overwhelming our personality. Normally, when there is a battle between the external forces trying to overpower us, if we succumb to it, it leads to death. That's the simple definition of life and death. The external circumstances, our immunity and all the things, the prana which is within loses the battle with the prana, universal prana, and when it loses the battle, the being dies. So there is a constant fight between this individual prana and the universal cosmic prana. So Swami Vivekananda says yoga teaches you a technique where you can, first of all, we have to get hold of our own prana. Very often people don't understand, they're in a hurry to control the external universe, the external prana. You can conquer army, you can conquer kingdoms, but unless you conquer your own self. That's why Vedanta focuses on the conquest of one's own self, because if you conquer the internal prana, you get access and you can control the external as well. So the whole pranayama is nothing but catching hold of the breath and then controlling the finer forces, which are the nervous forces, which is also a finer kind of prana. These nervous forces can control the thoughts, and the thoughts can control our the universal prana. Our thoughts are part of that universal prana. It's a manifestation of the universe which through our thoughts influence our whole personality. See, the whole of yoga is the Patanjali's yoga, Raj Yoga, in fact, is the exercise to control, somehow establish full control over our thoughts, our mind. so that we can control our own self. So that is the idea. But before we come to a stage where we can control our thoughts, we have to regulate our Annamaya Kosha, we have to regulate our Pranamaya Kosha. So in this example, the rope, which is the thick rope, is the universal prana. The stout twine the stout twine uh, which was used to pull the rope up. After the silken thread, there was a thin thread, and then there was a stout twine. That stout twine is are the thoughts. And before that, the pack thread is the nervous energy or the nervous force. And prana is the breath is the silken thread. So Swami Vivekananda gives this wonderful example and says that when we do pranayama, we begin with our breath. That is just like a silken thread. You can't achieve much through that. The silken thread is not strong enough to achieve our goal. So, but the silken thread can help us to control the nervous energy in our body. That's the function of controlling the breath. When we control our breath, when we breathe in a regular pattern, it helps us to control the nervous energy which is animating our entire body. And this nervous energy, the the thin thread attached to the silken thread, is like the nervous energy. That nervous energy can lift, or that nervous energy can control our thoughts. Thoughts are like the stout twine. In this example, the stout twine is like the thoughts. So by controlling the breath, we try to control the nervous energy which is passing through the spine, which are the efferent and efferent nerves, which give commands to the entire body and which receives commands from the sense organs and takes it to the centers in the brain. The respective centers in the brain gives the response, and then they again result in action. So this action and response which is going on with the help of our nervous energy, the energy of which is passing through the current of nervous energy which is passing through our entire body, is like the thread. So that can control our thoughts. So Bhagavan Buddha also said, when Buddha was asked, he said, as you think, so you become. So all our actions begin with thought. Thought is a finer force. So here in this case, the stouter thread which is there, the stout thread which was tied to the rope, the big rope, the universal prana, which was the rope. To control that, you have to control our thoughts. So that is the whole secret of yoga. By controlling the breath, you control the nervous currents. You have to, the yogis, they say, can feel this nervous current, they can feel the flow. They can have absolute control over their thoughts. Only that is only possible if you have control over your breath, you have control over your nervous energy, the flow of your nervous energy. It is the lack of balance or the disbalance which happens in the flow of our nervous energy when it is naturally flowing, when we are not practicing yoga, or when we are not leading a harmonious life. What happens is our prana gets disturbed. The fine balance of prana, which is controlling the bodily functions and also our mental functions, they have a tendency to get disturbed if the prana is not regulated, if breath is not regulated. So there are various techniques of regulating this breath. One of them is the repetition of the holy name, or it is known as mantra yoga. Through the repetition of mantra, they say pranayama can be achieved very easily because there is a certain kind of rhythmic repetition of the mantra. So even in Buddhist traditions, you have this, they take those gongs and then they use sound, and they use so many techniques, different techniques of controlling the mind. So one of the best ways is to have repeated thoughts, repeat some prayer or some mantra regularly. Even in the Russian Orthodox Church, they used to have a prayer, "Oh Lord Jesus, have mercy on me. Oh Lord Jesus, have mercy on me." So this constant repetition of a prayer, it directly or indirectly it regulates, helps to regulate our prana. That is why these rosaries and repeating of the holy name in the Sikh tradition. It's there in almost every tradition. We use our rosary to say our prayer, which has to be repeated again and again. This constant repetition in a particular sequence enables a person to regulate his breath, his prana. Breath is just the grossest aspect of prana. By regulating the breath through the japa or through the repetition of the holy name, this regular practice of japa leads to pranayama, and that pranayama leads to control over our nerves, the nervous energy, and that nervous energy decides the quality of mind we have, the regulation of our thoughts, the control of our thoughts, which is the goal of yoga. In fact, yoga is chitta vritti nirodha, as we often see. It's one of the second sutras of Patanjali. Patanjali says yoga means chitta vritti. Chitta means the receptacle of our mind. As I told you, the mind is made of 4 aspects. The human mind, according to yoga, is made of 4 aspects. One is the mind where ordinary instinctive thoughts are there. It is known as plain instinct. Even animals have that instinct. So if you have thoughts where there is action and response, the thoughts, they are the basic form of thoughts which we share with the animal kingdom. Even animals have some kind of preliminary thoughts which help them to communicate with the world, and they interact with the world using those primitive thoughts. That is known as mana. These thoughts are random. People very often do not know the origin of these thoughts. From where do these thoughts come? That is explained through these 4 partitions of the mind. The same mind has been divided into 4 parts. One is the cognitive mind, the simple mind, where it just gathers information, but doesn't take a judgment. That mind is known as buddhi, the discriminative mind. So the discriminative mind actually makes, in the process of evolution, it is the discriminative mind which is a unique characteristic of a human being. It can introspect, it can self-reflect, it can think about the thoughts. I mean, it can observe, one can observe one's own thoughts. So that power to self-reflect, the power to introspect, to power to see and observe the thoughts coming, that is known as the second part, which is known as buddhi in yoga. Then, as I told you, there is the chitta. Chitta means the receptacle which constitutes our tendencies or habits. Our tendencies or mental habits have been collected in that part of the mind which is known as chitta. So as the nature of our samskaras, the nature of our mental tendencies, samskaras means mental tendencies, the nature of our mental tendencies give rise to different kinds of thoughts. A person who is full of jealous samskaras of jealousy, at every small thing he'll start feeling envying others, or he becomes jealous of others. So it's even if without his even if he doesn't want to, these samskaras will force him to behave in a particular way. That is why Arjuna is told by Sri Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita that in spite of people make resolutions, people want to follow resolutions, but they can't follow. They know what is good, they know what is bad, but they can't avoid doing bad, nor can they be motivated to do the good thing. They know by doing this is harmful, but the force of habit, the force of the tendencies which are lying dormant in potential form in one part of the mind which is known as chitta. And the last part of the mind is the ego or the ahankara, which gives the feeling of I am doing this, I am doing that, I am good, I am bad. So all the ego is one essential aspect of the mind. So there are these are the 4 parts of the mind which we have to control. And what is the role which prana plays in this? So both the body and the prana, though they are grosser than the mind, can influence the mind to a certain extent. But once you get control of the mind, then the mind can control the prana, the mind can control the breath, The mind can control the functions of the body. So the mind has this tremendous capacity. As you go on evolving, the more you evolve on the mental plane, the more you make your mind refined, the more your buddhi increases, the more your discriminative power increases, the less the disturbance in your mind, the more concentrated and more focused your mind, the more powerful and the more prana it can control. So control of the mind is actually the goal, and ultimately when you still the mind, you allow uh, the prana and the body, the prana mainly, to regulate your mind through the help of some syllable or some mantra or some repeating the name of the god in a sequence. When you do it constantly over a period of time, the mind gets calmer and calmer. That's one way. Repeating of the holy name is one way of calming the mind. There are various types of meditation in Buddhism and other traditions. There is this you can just have this Sakshi Bhava in Vedanta, which is just be aware of everything. Be aware of your breath, you be aware of your body, be aware of all these things. It is known as awareness meditation. So this meditation, the varieties of meditation which we find in different traditions have one thing in common. Every meditation requires, the basic requisite or the basic requirement of a good meditation is control of thoughts, lessening of thoughts, and focusing of thoughts in one particular direction. So the more diverse your thoughts, the less concentrated you are. So concentration or dharana comes much before dhyana. Dhyana is real meditation where you lose your sense of self-identity. You lose yourself in that object. Only the object remains, the subject vanishes. So that is known as dhyana. So before we come to the regular meditation, we have to practice pratyahara, and as I told you, we have to practice pratyahara and dharana. Dharana can be compared to the technique of concentration which some traditions ask you to follow. You either concentrate on a flame, you concentrate on any object which is pleasing to your eyes, and go on concentrating on that object or object of meditation. So that is known as dharana. That is the 6th step in the 8 steps. Before that, of course, there is pratyahara. We'll discuss what it is. But before that, Swami Vivekananda tries to explain to us the necessity of understanding this prana in great detail. We'll be discussing it in this class and the next class also, because prana is something which is very it's very essential to understand what this concept of prana is. It has been the most misunderstood concept in both Vedanta and yoga. So when they say pranayama, that means you have to control your breath. Prana is nothing, it has very little to uh, do with breath. Swami Vivekananda says, if it all it has something, it's a first step. When you start doing pranayama, you use breath as a uh, medium through which you control your prana, the higher pranas. Pranas also are there in our body, and also it is animating the whole universe. It's the universal energy. So to understand that concept of prana, you have to first understand the philosophical background. That's why Swamiji discusses this particular point, and he says, just as the universe is made of 2 elements, akasha and prana. Akasha is the primordial matter and prana is the primordial force. So when force acts upon matter, the whole creation begins. So without force, matter cannot, matter is inert. So inert matter gets its dynamism from the force. So force or energy or prana. So prana acts on the akasha, the material universe, and both of them, they give rise to this whole creation. And when the akasha merges into its primal being and prana also merges into the universal prana, then we say that we reach that state of samadhi. I mean, the prana is completely absorbed in the that is why it is very important to understand the connection between our individual prana, the psychic prana, which animates our body, and the universal prana. So in the universe, the equivalent of the prana of the Annamaya Kosha and the Pranamaya Kosha at the universal level is Akasha and Prana. And Swamiji tries to generalize it. He says scientists were not satisfied with particular events in the universe. Every scientist believed is not satisfied till he finds some kind of unity. Every science ends with the unity. Swamiji says that is the nature of human mind. It seeks unity, it seeks some kind of unification, and it seeks unification at the material level. It seeks unification. The mind is not satisfied unless it seeks and attains that unification at the pranic level, at the energy level. So that's why this quest for unified field energy. What is the unified energy? There were various energies discovered in external world. I'm not taking into consideration the inner world. Inner world has inner forces. Just as we have magnetism, we have electricity, we have the weak forces, the quantum forces which we encounter. There are so many forces: gravitational force, heat, sound, and all these different types of forces or energies which we find in the universe has its equivalent in the internal universe. There is this nervous energy, there is this power to assimilate, and all the different digestive, the power to digest food. So prana, apana, samana, vyana, and udana. Udana is the force which gives rise to the heat in the body. So the body needs to be kept at a particular temperature. So the universal energy or the heat energy which is animating our body is known as Udana Vayu. So Udana is responsible for giving an upward thrust to every human being. At the same time, it is that aspect of that energy level which keeps our body temperature at a particular level. This is at the individual level. But at the universal level, we also have the equivalent of all these things. Whatever is true in the microcosm is true in the macrocosm also. The whole universe is built on the same plan. In fact, if you go still further down, the cell is also built on almost the same plan. That's why each individual cell, though we think we are in total control, in fact we are nothing but a colony of so many uh, trillion cells. Several trillion cells constitute our body, and each cell is intelligent. Each cell has its own universe. It is a microcosm in itself. And that cell, when all the cells work together as a community, it gives a result, it gives rise to our body. So also in the universe, we take small objects. They are somehow, this interconnectedness of the material universe is a very well established theory now in science. So the interconnectedness of the prana also, the universal energy also has to be accepted. And that same interconnectedness, that unification of energy should take place at our physical individual level also. Because our personality, when you do pranayama, what in fact you do is you try to gather the forces of all the different pranas which are now without any control, they're haphazard. And that is why we find this disbalance in prana, and that's why we fall sick. In fact, one of the reasons, according to Ayurveda, uh, we fall sick because of this disbalance in the different pranas. There are 5 pranas which are animating our body: prana, apana, samana, vyana, and udana. So they have been classified into different forces in our body depending on the function which it does. If it is breathing, it is prana. If it is apana, the things which are go down against with gravity, that is known as apana vayu, the excretion of the materials from the body. There is a constant downward motion, that is known as apana. Then samana is the force which takes nutrients, which takes the blood to all parts of our body, to every cell of our body. It takes oxygen, it takes so many things. So that's vayu, that prana is known as samana. So the moment this samana stops, the samana, vyana, Vyana is, as I told you, the nervous energy. So each one of these pranas are necessary for us to think, for us to act, for us to respond to certain stimuli. Everything which happens in the universe, for interaction, we require the assistance or the support of all these prana, different 5 pranas. Each one has a different function. Udana, according to the prana theory, the udana is the energy which gives rise to body heat. And they say that is the last to leave the body. When one body goes into Mahasamadhi, the Udana Vayu is the last to leave. So even in ordinary human beings, when you say the Udana Vayu is left the body, you can see that there's no longer, it can go through any exit, but normally it goes through the Sahasrara Chakra. So the moment the prana ceases to function in our body, we just drop dead. That is how death is defined. Because the body is there, the Annamaya Kosha is still there. A few minutes ago you were alive, now suddenly an attack comes and you die. All the pranas have simply withdrawn from your body and they are seeking a new body. So this prana, it's the very life of a human being. Prana is that which animates not only the individual but also the universe. And the goal of yoga is to learn pranayama so that you are not, the universal prana doesn't come and disturb you now and then. You can develop your prana to such an extent that you can have full control over that prana, and that pranayama due to pranayama, because of pranayama, and that pranayama if you extend and apply it to the higher levels of our existence like Manomaya Kosha, the Vijnanamaya Kosha and the Anandamaya Kosha, this prana, it's not just acting on the body and the mind, it is going beyond. Prana is a very important thing. That's why you have to study it in great detail. So now there are just 6 minutes, so I think I should just stop here, because in the next class we will try to discuss in great detail the prana in general, the universal prana in general, how they are classified, what is its purpose, and most of the time this prana, to understand this prana, we consider the scientific methodology where we see the force or energy that acts upon matter. It's very convenient to translate prana as energy, but it is not as simple as the energy which we see in the external world. There are subtle energies which are required for the functioning of our human body also. Our nervous system requires energy, our digestion requires energy. You can't even run the body without this prana. So prana is an inseparable part of our life, and after death, of course, they say the prana leaves the body. But where does it go? Does it vanish? No. The prana becomes the receptacle in which all our subtle mind, our samskaras, our thoughts, our tendencies, everything, the subtle form is encased in this prana, and it searches for a new body and then takes birth. So this is this prana, the functioning of prana, how it impacts human personality, how it impacts the body first, that is from the Hatha Yoga side or the Asana Yoga type of uh, exercise. But if you use this prana and try to understand its effect on the mind and on the buddhi, then it is a great evolution. A person, human being only is capable of doing that. Otherwise, most of the prana in animals and in lower people who have not evolved is simply being used at a lower level in maintaining the body. So prana has it's like a double-edged sword. It can act on the body, it can act on the mind. So the function where it acts on the mind, that is the object of study now, and we will be taking it in the next class. I'll conclude now. In the next class, we'll discuss the relationship between what is this universal prana and how the individual is affected. How is life? How does this individual, the proper, nurture of this individual prana, how it can help in overcoming the tremendous force of the universal prana, and what is the connection between them. So this is the object of study. So Swamiji, in the next class we'll decide, we'll try to discuss how this prana, individual prana, is connected to the higher prana. We'll begin from there, and then we'll find some wonderful discoveries Swamiji has made based on his own experience. As I told you, Raj Yoga is one book which he wrote from his own experience. It was not just an intellectual study of the Raj Yoga translations which would have been available there. It was definitely not available in English. So Swami Vivekananda took great pain and care to give the most correct interpretation of these Yoga Sutras and the Bhashyas. Otherwise, there is a tendency, if somebody less than a guru or a person like Swami Vivekananda, if he doesn't meditate and give these ideas will never become clear. We'll get a hazy picture of what this prana is, what all these things are there. But if you see Swamiji's 3 chapters, can you imagine? he discusses this prana to such a great extent. So that shows how prana can influence our thoughts, not only influence our body, but it can influence our thoughts, our entire future. So that is why this Raj Yoga assumes so much importance, because in no other book or no other sadhana this prana is studied in such great detail, and the japa is also encouraged. So the repetition of the name, which gives rise to automatic pranama, is also part of our sadhana. So now we'll try to discuss about the universal prana and the deeper connections which we can have as a result of our meditation, of the repetition of the holy name and all those things. So we will discuss in the next class. If there are some questions, we can take a few questions quickly. Huh? Yeah. Yeah, unmuted you.
Okay.
Yeah. I have unmuted Purnima Shankar. Yes, please ask the question. Yes.
I was thinking, like, when a yogi reaches the nirvana,
what
will happen to his causal body and the samskaras part of
they will disperse. I mean, they will disintegrate, because he doesn't need them anymore. You see, when the Annamaya Kosha vanishes, when a person dies, a normal, not a yogi, anybody who has not reached the goal, if he dies, then he can take up another body. But when we reach nirvana, or when we reach the purusha, or whatever it is, or brahma jnana, there are so many ways of defining the highest realization. So when you attain that, then there is no need for the body. The body has served its purpose. So the body falls off after a while when the prarabdha karma is over, and then the pranas, they disintegrate or disperse into the universal prana. They mix. Yeah, they don't you don't require prana for what? You have already realized your identity with the infinite consciousness.
The intelligence.
That happens very rarely. I mean, only those who get mukti or those who get nirvana, they can. There's no rebirth. That's why they say they are not born again.
So it is absorbed into the universe, basically.
Yeah, it is. Pranas are respected. See, each individual prana has a universal component also at the cosmic level. So it merges into that. Prana will merge into the universal prana. Apana will merge into universal apana. Samana, Vyana, all these different 5 pranas are there. They merge into the respective. Even mind will be merging into cosmic mind. The mind also. So nothing will remain. When the person who has got nirvana, the moment he leaves the body, everything starts disintegrating. Nothing is left. Only the body will be left naturally, because it is a material thing. But because there is no prana, that body is of no use. So then the prana also will go, definitely. It will merge into the universe. Yes, yes. So Ashok wants to ask. Ashok? Yeah, I have unmuted you. Ashok can ask.
Yeah, sure. Is the mind of a person inside the body or outside the body?
Oh, it's It's a very complicated thing. We'll have to have one whole session for that. Mind is definitely not within the, it cannot be restricted to the brain as it is popularly understood. Mind is not a function. It is one of the ways the mind uses the brain to give signals to our nervous system and then to our body. But mind is much vaster and more subtler than the brain. I mean the Annamaya Kosha and even the Pranamaya Kosha. So it is more subtler, it is all pervasive. It can at one instant it can be here, another instant it can go to Washington, it can traverse anywhere, it can even cross the cosmos and come back. So mind has no, you may say it doesn't have any borders. It cannot be restrained anywhere. That's why a person, when he lives predominantly in his mental plane, on the higher, more and more refined his mind becomes, he becomes a lot, you call, it's that the quality is known as omniscience. You become omniscient. The Ishvara, the mind of the Ishvara is omniscient. He becomes one with the cosmic mind. So the mind has no shape or size or anything. It is not. It cannot be contained within the body, for sure.
Okay.
But it can act through the body. It can act through the brain. It requires an organ to interact with the body. It requires a nervous system. The thoughts influence the brain influences the nervous system, and nervous system influences the body and gives commands, and the body acts. So without the mind, these things will not function. Then it's like a person in a coma, for example. But still, there is this autonomous nervous system. So you can't say the mind totally goes away. The prana still lives, the prana still functions independent of the mind. When somebody is in a coma, the thoughts may not be there. He may not have any thought, but his body functions don't stop, isn't it? We see the body functions going on. So the autonomous nervous system is perfectly okay. I mean, it is going on. So that is the reason.
Thank you. Thank you.
There's one more, Indrajit Ray. Yes, yes, yes. Indrajit, you can ask. I have unmuted you. Are you able to hear me, Indrajit? Oh, you can't speak. Okay, I'll ask somebody else. Somebody else who has raised the hand. So, Suren Raja. Amita wants to ask? Yes. Yes. You can ask. Can you hear me? Okay, Sharon wants to ask. You want to ask? Yes.
When Swamiji tells about not accepting gifts,
Yes.
I find that some confusion, because when you think how when you as sadhus, your first thing you go out, you accept the gift of food, and the whole way the movement of Thakur and the order is all accepting gifts, isn't it?
Yeah,
So
but
it
we have to
seems
pay a
there's some,
price for that. We have to pay a price for that. You have to perhaps do a
but
lot
you
of
have
japa.
taken that.
Huh? No,
But
you see, it depends on the attitude. The gift, if you don't have the idea of possessorship of that gift, then it does not affect you. It depends on the attitude also.
of the recipient.
Of the recipient, yeah. The recipient can have an attitude, a detached attitude. Or Swami Brahmananda, there is a beautiful incident. When Brahmananda was meditating in the Himalayas, he was just, because a lot of people give blankets to the sadhus as gift. So Brahmananda had taken a vow that he will not accept any gift. But he was meditating, and many times people used to come and just place something in front of him. And he used to keep quiet and he used to continue his meditation because he has not accepted it. Somebody has kept it in his in front of him. Then after some time he sees something very strange happening. Somebody else, a thief, comes and takes it away. And he is least bothered. Somebody gave and somebody took it away. So if you have that attitude, I mean, that is when you are practicing sadhana. But otherwise, if you accept gift, there is nothing wrong. Maybe you have to compensate for that. That's all. You have to do japa for the person who has given you.
So
Or
that's a
you
good
have to
way.
give or you give it back. You give it in some other form.
So if you
If
do
you don't
japa,
want the effect of the gift to create a samskara in you, then you have to either return it in a different way. It may sound very rude if you return it directly. So you compensate in some other way. So it's as good as not accepting the gift. Or you pray for him. If you,
they don't have to know that, do
that's
they,
why
Maharaj?
Holy Mother used to tell something wonderful. He says, though, if you are not in a position to give something, you can do japa for him. You can pray for him. So even prayer is a kind of gift. So if sometimes it is unavoidable and you accept a gift, then perhaps you can compensate in a much better way by praying for him. Praying for him or her, whoever gives you the gift.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Yeah,
Thank
that's
you.
a practical way of thinking. Otherwise, you will end up not taking any gifts at all.
Yeah, it's true.
And
And
actually,
sometimes,
it will hurt a lot of people, who give you something with love.
yes. Thank you, Maharaj.
Yes. Acha, Amita, can you speak now? I have unmuted you.
Right, Maharaj. Now,
Oh yes,
I
now
knew
I
what
can
the
hear.
problem was.
Okay, fine.
Do you hear me now?
Yes.
Great. Maharaj, you said Akasha is the primal material
Yes.
and Prana is the primal force.
Yes.
And the combination of these two creates the universe, yeah?
Creation, yes. As we see it, the world as we see it, yes.
Creation. As we see it, the world as we see it.
That is what
But
Sankhya,
we see Akasha as a primal material. Normally we know it as ether or space, Maharaj.
No. Space is one aspect of Akasha.
Akasha?
Akasha is a technical word. In Bengali, Akasha means sky. Akash. We say na Akash means sky, is space. But it is not in the Sankhya. Akasha is the primal matter. Actually, before it manifests as the gross matter, it exists in a potential form in the final matter. It's like, in physics, they have this idea of dark hole. Black hole. So where even gravity does not escape, everything collapses into the primal, everything becomes potential. So there Akasha cannot be seen. Even all the universes, as it were, are sucked into that black hole. So Swamiji says the primal matter, which is the Akasha, is not seen. It is only when it comes, when creation takes place, when prana acts upon that Akasha, then only you see the gross Akasha. The gross matter, the gross material which you see, the liquid, solid, gaseous state which you see in the universe, is after the prana acts. So that's why at the fundamental atomic level, if you go deep into this quantum physics, you will find a strange phenomena. You don't know whether you see matter or you can't see matter and energy at the same time. They tend to merge somewhere.
Maharaj, you lost your voice. We can't hear you.
Why? You're not able to hear me? How is it possible?
Can't hear you.
Now?
Now I can hear you.
Amit, you can hear me? Yes. So, the Akasha at the quantum level, if you go into the subatomic level, they say there is this uncertainty principle. You cannot predict the mass and the energy of a particle at the same time. That means there are stages where you don't know whether it is energy or mass. They get interconverted so fast, they get converted into each other so fast that Akasha becomes prana, prana becomes, they interact. When they interact with each other, then the whole creation appears to us as matter. So if you go deep into matter, it vanishes into energy, and energy also vanishes. I mean, it goes into the primal state. So that is why Swamiji says there is a primal Akasha which gives rise to gross matter, and there is a primal prana, the primal force, which gives rise to all these various forces like gravitation, like heat, like light, sound. These are all much later when the creation has already taken place. That's why you in Samadhi, all the whole creation vanishes into nothing. I mean, that is a state which one has to experience. It cannot be explained. I mean, nobody can explain it, because we are talking in the created universe. Na? We are talking with the help of our mouth and things which are very gross. So we can't. We have to only experience the subtle, and even to go beyond the subtle, you have to evolve higher and higher and develop yourself in a very subtle way.
Okay, that explains, Maharaj. It's just confusion in my mind because of ether.
Oh,
Akasha being ether.
No, Akasha, the colloquial, I mean, the in the regional languages, Hindi, Marathi, and
Everywhere
Akasha,
means
sometimes
sky.
it refers to sky also.
Okay, thank you, Maharaj.
So Ravi, we'll have the last question. Ravi Lingam. Yes.
Hello.
Yes, you can ask.
Yeah.
Please ask.
I'm just following from the previous question about your mind. So if my mind merges with the cosmic mind, it becomes omniscient. What does it mean for me? Like, what will I experience?
No,
I'm
it's
just
not
trying
so
to express-
easy. See, we retain our individual mind. It is very easy to say that. Omniscient mind means it is the Ishvara. I mean, it can be Ishvara or people who reach that state, they can read others' thoughts. They practically think through other people. I mean, they have the control of the entire universal mind. But that is a very, very difficult state. Unless we evolve to a very high state, we cannot even conceive of that, what it means to, because the universal mind is something which you cannot achieve in this life. Our minds can expand. There is a limit to the expansion of our minds. It can become more liberal, it can become more generous, it can become more sympathetic or empathetic to others, like Buddha. So when the mind becomes more and more broader and more finer, and it evolves, then it goes closer to the universal mind. That is how these prophets, the minds of these prophets are powerful, because they went, I mean, their minds became more and more subtle, more and more finer, and they practically, it was just a semblance of the mind. They were practically, their minds became one with the whole creation. So they could perform miracles, they could understand things, they could even read others' thoughts. So these are the powers the yogi will come to that when we discuss the result of concentration. What happens when we develop these powers of the mind? Though they are not encouraged, we are not supposed to go after those powers, but it is possible. When you control your prana, when you control your mind, and you connect it to the universal mind, your intelligence, your power, the capacity to understand everything increases.
Okay.
So right now you can't even imagine what this universal mind is unless you yourself become an incarnation. So which is not possible, at least in this birth. Yeah. You have to be born as an incarnation to understand what a universal mind is. We are not even able to control our limited mind, it becomes depressed and we don't know what to do with this small problem. Leave alone becoming, assuming in universal proportions, we even can't adjust our small minds with the few people, with society and with a few people. It gets submerged, or it gets depressed, it gets totally overwhelmed by the other minds. That shows our minds are so weak. The stronger your mind, the more influence you can create on others. And that happens when your prana animates the mind. That's why Swamiji says, if your proper understanding of the prana gives you tremendous power over not only your body but also your mind also. It can definitely increase the capacity of the mind to bear sorrows, to influence other people, to inspire people, and all those things. These are the results of a concentrated mind, a concentrated prana also. Okay?
Thank you.
So I'll take your leave now. There are no more questions. Namaste.